Chris Forhan is going to read second. Now, I have a great story here about Chris. Chris's wife, Alessandra Lynch, is a poet, and she also read here a couple years ago. In 2007, now I knew her since she was 17 years old. She was my student as a freshman many years ago. She didn't want me to say how long ago that was. But in 2007, Chris and Alessandra met at a party at my house and fell in love and got married. And they had 2 babies right there in the back of the room. So I don't know what that means to the young men here, but you might want to think about poetry and what might happen. Chris has published 3 books, The Actual Moon, The Actual Stars, Black Leapt In, Forgive Us Our Happiness. He's been gotten an NEA grant. He teaches at Butler University, as does Alessandra, his wife. I just think his poems are alive and alert to both the great light of the world, and also he's unafraid to face the world's darkness.
Thank you for coming. This is a great crowd. Up at Butler in Indianapolis, where I teach, we have a really wonderful visiting writers series. We bring in people all the time, and I always think that's really special. In fact, it might be unique, but no, this matches it in energy and just the number of people here. It's really great. I guess I want to thank Bruce first of all for those wonderful poems, and also first of all for endowing the chair that brought Tom here. Tom is not just the born professor of poetry, but a born professor of poetry. And you can ask Alessandra, my wife, who still feels nurtured by him after all these years. Those first lessons about poetry and about life that he taught her when she was in college. I used to teach at Auburn a couple of hours down the road. It's a nice little town. It's the loveliest village on the plains. I don't know if you've been there, but I used to come here every chance I could get, mainly to come to these readings for sustenance. And so I just feel very honored to be able to be a part of this magnificent reading series and this magnificent community, if only for a short period of time. I'm going to read mainly, maybe even exclusively, from this most recent book, Black Leapt In, which is a very personal book. And I think I was afraid to be personal, or for a long time where I just thought you're not supposed to be personal. It's gauche, you know. But then I couldn't help myself. These things just came gushing out of me, and they're, a lot of them are just, they're not just, but they're poems about childhood, and you hear a poet say, I'm going to read you some poems about my childhood, and it's like you want to just run rushing for the doors. Right? But I hope they're not just about my childhood, but they're about bigger things than that. I think often of what Stanley Kunitz said. He said something. Stanley Kunitz, the great poet, who's no longer with us, he said something like, the poet's job is not with his life to confess it, to report it, but his job is to turn his life into legend. Which I take to mean to find the mythic element in it, the universal element in it. And so even though I wasn't conscious of trying to do that with these poems, I think that was a kind of an unconscious guiding principle. And this first poem strikes me as pretty representative of that idea. It's filled with what you might consider mundane details of a life. But the thing is, lives generally are filled with mundane details. That's what our lives are, if we're lucky, as opposed to traumatic details. So that's what I had, that, for the most part, as my experience of living. And so that's the poem. So I try to make a poem out of it. This is called Testament, and I hope you'll sense there's some mythologizing at work here. Testament. Being made to drink vinegar from a sponge, that part was true, and feeling bad for the lepers. Being a Cub Scout with a glue gun in a paneled den, one jar of silver glitter, one of blue. My wings then, with duct tape, I strapped them down. Near the backstop, I rolled in the dust to muss them. The cave's mouth glowed gold, but I missed it. I was tucked in. My brain was filled to bursting with the TV listings. I rode a red bike with a warning bell. I stood in the lunch line while a hole was punched in my milk ticket. Ducks vanished into the mist upon the wading pool. Some sorcery, some hopefulness. I lowered my head to accept the canvas bag of newspapers. I crossed the creaky footbridge to Bill O'Meara's house. A pale pink light on everything. No scribe for all that then. A hurt squirrel pulled its bulk across the grass. I placed my hand upon it. I washed right after. That was not I among the reeds. I was with the others on the patio playing parcheesi. I was slouched in the back of the school bus, thumbing the transistor's volume knob. I wore the satiny green trunks of our team. And many of the poems in this book turned out to be about my father, who was a troubled and mysterious man, and he died when he was young and when I was young. He was 44, I was 14. He took his own life. And I had written some poems about him, and I kind of, it's a silly thing to think, but I thought I was done with it. Okay? Now I'm going to move along. And then the psychologists in here can do something with this. That I turned about 44, and all these poems started gushing out of me. So without much comment, I'm going to read just a kind of suite of these poems, 4 poems about that subject. This is called Having Crept from My Bed. Pressed against coats in the family room closet, I peered through the door slats at my father watching television. An astronaut waved from a white convertible, confetti in his crew cut. He'd been where the planets crash and whirl. I might have been a moth or shoe, not breathing, not flinching, as the day rolled away on its slow wheel. My father aimed the remote. A man was lowered to the ocean floor, clamped in a bathysphere. Down there, the fish don't have eyes. My father lifted his drink. We watched morning sun burn mist from the encampment. The colonel sent word to take the hill. It is possible to be born a prince and slip into each day as into a golden robe. It is possible to feel your chest fill with ash. Something was ending. The black screen, scroll of the credits, blue smoke swirling from the tip of my father's cigarette. A tornado skittered like a phonograph needle over a farmland. My father set down his glass. Then a woman in an apron was standing where her home had been. As I was writing these poems, it struck me that I was doing all the talking and I should let my dad talk. It was his story, as well as mine. This is a poem in which that happens, talking through me. It's called My Father's Curriculum Vitae. I always look that up in the dictionary. It's pronounced vitae according to my dictionary. And sometimes I read this to audiences and I see people whispering to each other. They don't know what they're saying. They're saying, isn't it vitae? So call it what you will. CV, resume. My father's CV. And so it's in the form of a CV in his voice. Chronological order. I was handed the pamphlet of maxims, took it into my heart. Folks did that then. Was grandson, pal, penitent, fulfilled the contract. Distinguished myself in trig and cigarettes. in whistling whatever had topped the hit parade. Plucked my brother from the lake, tucked him into the lining of my cap on the chance he'd undrown one day. Put on the soldier's gear, shipped islandward. You should have seen me in my dress whites, dozed at my post just the one time. Picked a gray suit and a brown one, stood rigid while the pins slipped in. Clicked the briefcase shut, open, shut. Wielded the slide rule, wielded the silver shoehorn. Come to me, Christ, I cried, there's mud in my eye sockets. Woke to rustling, my dead mother, my gone father, back as two birds in a fluster above my head. Roused the children from bed, showed them how each planet spins, distant, arranged blue marbles on the carpet. Dug pennies from my pocket, tossed them into a bowl. Entered the bedroom once, ready to speak to her. Sat on the floor, rocked, and said nothing. Lowered the Ford's idle, tightened the Chevy's brakes, watched the bubble fidget in the spirit level. Whispered, farewell, farewell, into my own ear. Slept late on Sundays, then Mondays, then couldn't sleep. Knelt in a field of strawberries, damp dirt, damp leaves. Pretty wife, in the row to my right, my good children. Lifted a bit of that redness to my lips, little thought in it, just taking sweetness in, sweet shock of not knowing, of not remembering. Pretty wife. This is called Vanishing Act. Each bed with a child in it, or his wife, his brain lined with sleeping bees. My father is having to leave the house with delicacy, easing the dead bolt open in the dark. The house exhales him. I'm thinking of a driving layup, of a girl in homeroom, blue necklace, brown skin, transistor radio on my pillow, volume low. I know some things, not enough. My eyes are closed. I'm listening hard, that song again. Knock down the old gray wall. My father standing beside his car, gone. Key in his hand, snowflakes in his hair. At dawn, an Indian head test pattern will stare from the TV. The freezer will churn out its automatic ice. On the windowsill, an iris in a vase will have taken the last water into its cut stem. I will notice it, how it is there, and had stood there the whole time, that flower. What he left behind. Jam jar of cigarette ends and ashes on his workbench. Hammer he nailed our address to a stump with. Balsa wood steamship half finished. Is that him waving from the stern? Well, good luck to him. Slur of sunlight filling the backyard, August's high wattage, white blossoming. It's a curve, it comes back. My mother in a patio chair, leaning forward, squinting, threading her needle again. Her eye lifts to the roof, to my brother, who stands and jerks his arm upward. He might be insulting the sky, but he's only letting go a bit of green, a molded plastic soldier tied to a parachute, thin as a bread bag. It rises, It arcs against the blue. Good luck to it. My sister and I below, heads tilted back as we stand in the grass. Good luck to all of us. Still here, still in love with it. A couple of teenage poems. This poem struck me as a major development in my work because I use the F word. Never done it before. And I wouldn't read it now, except my mother is 3,000 miles away and she'll never know. And it's kind of standard, teenage scene, cruising around, guys cruising around in a car, thinking they're getting somewhere, looking as if they think they're getting somewhere, but just going around in circles. It's called Cruising Lake City, and I'm from Seattle. Lake City is a neighborhood in Seattle where I grew up. Cruising Lake City. Car full of fuck-ups. Unlaureled, easy ironists. 'Twas wit-lack we suffered. 'Twas 16. And Emerson, Lake, and Palmer. And inexact timing. Fingers drumming the dash and seatbacks. A kind of piety in that. Scott's mom's dilapidated Plymouth. Burger bags, bullhorn for public wisecracks in Kurt's Pakistani accent. 'Twas certitude and love, love, like a fox that gnawed at our chests. Al rolling his window down on Beth's block to place in each mailbox a tiny mustard pack. I slouched in the back, a mistake with a face. What fuse in Sue Cardinal's heart had blown so it could not want me, so it would not grieve if I kneeled and died beneath her window, unhouselled? How about that? Night fog like wool in the trees. None of us mentioned it. Rudderless we rode, without although, without because, just this, and us, which was almost enough. I was born in 1959, which is, I guess any time you're born, it's an odd time to be born. I mean, just being born is odd enough, but it's a kind of in-between period. I was too young to be a hippie or to go to Vietnam, and slightly too old, it struck me, to be whatever, I don't know, the 18-year-olds of 1984 were being, which is like young Republicans or something. I felt kind of lost, or maybe I was just a young poet, And this poem is in part about being, in that feeling of being stuck between generations, and also the feeling of guilt. I was raised Catholic, so the guilt's everywhere in these things, but the guilt of actually not having to go to Vietnam and things like that. Being just the right age to skate along and be safe. It's called Shrink Wrap. Can't get these Western 70s teenage clothes off. I started as a twitchy, witless, newborn rat pup, thrilled with the nipple and milk. Willingly, forthwith, I slipped the Tangerine Dream concert t-shirt over my skinniness, tried the wide white belt, tried Tang, tried my new heart, inscrutable as calculus and obstinately blue, not as you'd notice. I was pink-skinned from pudding and meatloaf. I counted down to liftoff, counted down the hits. Was too young to be a jungle grunt on his stomach in the mud. I'd like to pay for that now. Pay for the summers, glad endless meadows of television. Pay for my paltry, safe, American, belated boy life. Bobby Kennedy didn't hurt me. Nixon didn't. Lynn did when she leaned her head against Peter's at the pencil sharpener. Lenin did when his skin let the bullets in. I knew then I could weep for a stranger, or my records. Otherwise, and what is the penance for this? I lay on a raft and drifted across the lake of myself, little lidless blind eye. At this late date, what is mine to offer in payment for such debt? Steely Dan's second album, perhaps? Never played, mint, original shrink wrap. Thankfully, my wife is taking care of the children now, which is why we don't hear them. I was taking care of them during... Okay. This is a more recent and perhaps happy poem. You know, for a long time, I was childless, and I just assumed, okay, you know, people go through life without having kids. And then I was invited to a party at Tom Lux's house. And, you know, 5 years later, I have 2 sons. And this is a poem, you know, I wrote this as my wife was pregnant with our first child, and I just knew it was a girl. Didn't turn out to be that way. So that's why the character in this poem is a girl. I might revise it, but that seems, you know, cheating. But anyway. It's called Solo Act. The moon put the screws to me and shut me up. The Phoebe trained me to flutter from the cliffside, a berry in my beak. No want in me then, or human friend. I took instruction from the dolphin, nodded, grinned, skittered backward across water. A man can step from his life as if from a bus, can settle for thistle and bird song, wistful, safe elucidations of beauty. Not for me to bleed on the razor wire. Fox-like I crept, would father no son, hazard no daughter. Oh, daughter, I did not mean to lug love to where you could not live. Come out with your candle, lean your ladder against my branch, lift a crumb in your cupped hand. I'm hungry, hungry enough, I think, at last, to be defenseless against you. And one more poem, and I should precede it with an apology. I think this often happens with poets. They write things and they think, boy, that's good. I'm so original. And then I realized I stole it from Tom Lux. He's got a poem called Render, Render, which is, you know, one of his hits, and you've probably heard it, some of you. And I wrote this poem, I thought, oh, it's like Render, Render, you know, transposed, you know, slightly into a different subject. But nonetheless, I claim it as mine, but since Tom's here, you know, and I'm going to read it, I thought you know, before, you know, halfway through, he's going to say, wait a minute, stop the reading! So I figured I'd just, you know, defuse the situation. It's called Rock Polisher, and some of you might know what a rock polisher is. When I was growing up in our neighborhood, one of the neighbors had a rock polisher, which is a little machine. You put some chemicals in it and some compounds, and then you plug it in, and then you throw a little rock in it. And you turn it on, and it goes for like a week. And then you turn it off, and you take out your rock, and it's nice and shiny. And you know, when I remembered that just struck me immediately as a beautiful metaphor for something. And mainly for, I mean, this kind of poignant urge we have, some of us, to change things that don't need changing, you know, to perfect, to fix. It's like, you know, rocks are pretty cool looking as they are, you know, but this idea that, you know, you can put all that work into making a rock look even better so it's, you know, fit for your mantelpiece, it struck me as sweet and kind of odd. Anyway, so this is called Rock Polisher. Thank you again for coming. Rock Polisher. Your father bought it, brought it to the basement utility closet, waited while a test pebble tumbled in it. 1 week, he'd willed it to brilliance. The grit kit's yours now, the silicon carbide pack. Split it, have at it. Jasper, agate, amethyst, crystal, it'll churn to a luster. Listen to small rocks grind the big one down. Stones in the driveway, pry them up, why not? They'll fit. Glass knobs on your mother's bathroom cabinet. Your baseball and mitt, polish them. Polish that zero-win Pee Wee League season. The thing your sister said and then took back, you still have it. Polish it. Polish the snowless Christmas when all you'd hoped for was snow. It's way past lights out now. You're crouched above the barrel, feeding it your school shoes, your haircut in 8th grade, flat bangs to the bridge of your nose. The moment that girl on the track team touched your wrist, then kept her fingers there, the way you loved dumbly and do. If the sun's up, it's nothing. You're polishing. You're pouring in the ocean, rolling rocks into cobbles too slowly. And the sky, it was Mozart's, was Christ's sky. No matter, dismantle it, drop it into the tumbler, and you too get in there with your dad and your mom and the cat, one by one, the whole family, and God's mercy, perfect at last.